Hey everyone, and welcome. Ever stop and wonder what a truly, perfectly fair market would actually look like? You know, a place with no powerful brands, no secret advantages, just pure, raw competition. It almost sounds like an economist's fantasy, right? Well, it has a name: perfect competition. And it's this incredibly important, idealized model that helps us understand how pretty much every other market really works. So let's dive right in and explore the rules of this unique economic world. So, here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to lay down the ground rules. What is perfect competition? Then we'll zoom right in on a single company to see what it's like to have zero control over your price. From there, we'll get into their main goal, making the most profit possible. We'll also tackle the tough question of what to do when you're losing money. And finally, we'll see how all of this comes together to build the market supply curve itself. It all connects, piece by piece.
Okay, let's get into our first section. Before we can figure out how a business even operates in this kind of market, we've got to understand the super strict rules that created in the first place. So, what exactly does it take for a market to earn the title perfect?
Well, for a market to be perfectly competitive, four incredibly strict conditions have to be met. First, you have tons of firms selling identical products to tons of buyers. Think about something like wheat, or even mealie meal from thousands of different farms. To the person buying it, one bag is pretty much a perfect substitute for any other. Second, there are absolutely no barriers to entry. Anybody can decide to start their own mealie farm tomorrow if they wanted to. Third, old established firms have no built-in advantages over brand new ones. And finally, and this is a big one, everyone, buyers and sellers is perfectly informed about prices. There are no secret deals. When you put all four of these together, you get the ultimate level playing field.
So how does a world like this even come about? It really boils down to two main things. First, the firms have to be small relative to the market. There's no room for massive giants that dominate everyone else. And second, and this is absolutely critical, consumers have to see the products as completely identical. They just don't care about the brand or any special features. All they care about is getting the lowest price.
All right, let's move on to our next section. We've just defined this huge, competitive market. Now we're going to zoom in and look at just one individual firm to see what the biggest consequence of living by those four rules really is.
And that consequence is this: the firm becomes what economists call a price taker. Now, this is a huge concept, so let it sink in. A price taker is a company that has zero, and I mean zero power, to influence the price of its product. It can't charge more because buyers would just instantly go to a competitor. And it has no reason to charge less because it can already sell everything it can make at the going market rate. It simply has to accept or take whatever price the market decides.
This slide shows it all perfectly. Look at the graph on the left. That's the entire market for sweaters. You've got the demand from all the buyers and the supply from all the sellers. And where they cross, boom, the market sets the price at $25. Now, look to the right. This is the world from the perspective of one tiny firm, Campus Sweaters. Since they're just a drop in the ocean, their decision to make a few more or a few less sweaters doesn't change that market price at all. So for them, no matter what they do, the price they get is $25. And that's why the demand curve for their product is that perfectly flat, horizontal line. That's their reality.
So in economics jargon, we say the demand for this one firm's product is perfectly elastic. What on earth does that mean? Well, it means that if Campus Sweaters try to charge just 1 cent more, say $25.01, their sales would instantly drop to zero. Gone. Why? Because every single customer knows they can get the exact same sweater from a competitor for $25. It's this perfect substitutability that makes the firm totally powerless over price.
Okay, so if you're running Campus Sweaters, you can't control the price. The market has already made that decision for you. So what decision is left? Well, you get to decide how many sweaters to produce. And that brings us to the absolute core of any business: the quest for maximum profit.
Now, one way to figure out the best quantity is to just look at the big picture: total revenue versus total cost. That straight blue line is total revenue. It's straight because every single sweater sells for the same $25. The curvy green line is total cost. You'll notice it starts above zero. Those are your fixed costs, like rent, that you have to pay even if you do nothing. Then it curves up because eventually it gets more and more expensive to make each additional sweater. The goal is pretty simple. Find the quantity where that vertical gap between the blue revenue line and the green cost line is as big as possible. That gap, that's your profit.
And this next slide shows that gap perfectly. The bottom graph literally just plots the profit at every possible output. You can see at the beginning, the firm is actually losing money, but then it crosses into the profitable zone. And look right there, at an output of exactly 9 sweaters a day, the profit curve hits its absolute highest point. $42. If they make 8 sweaters, they make less. If they try to make 10, they also make less. 9 is the magic number, the sweet spot.
Now, looking at the totals works, but it's a little clumsy, right? It doesn't really help you make a quick decision. But don't worry, there's a much more powerful and elegant way to get to the exact same answer, and it involves one of the most important ideas in all of economics, thinking at the margin.
Okay, let's meet our key players for this new approach. That flat orange line is our marginal revenue, or MR. Now, marginal is just a fancy way of saying for the next one. Since every sweater sells for $25, the extra revenue from selling one more is always $25. Simple enough. That pink U-shaped line is the marginal cost, or MC. This is the cost of producing just one more sweater. It's U-shaped because at first, things get more efficient, but eventually the factory gets crowded and it starts costing more and more to make that next one.
This brings us to what is basically the golden rule of making profits, and it's really intuitive if you think about it. If making one more sweater brings in more money than it costs you to make it, you should totally make it, right? It adds to your profit. And you should keep doing that right up until the cost of making that very next one is exactly equal to the revenue you get from it. This is the rule. Produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. MR equals MC.
Now let's trace this logic on the graph. Imagine you're making the 8th sweater. Your marginal revenue is $25, and your marginal cost, the pink line, is clearly below $25. So, you make a profit on that sweater. Great. Should you make a 9th? Well, the revenue is still $25, and the cost is still below that, so yes. But what about the 10th sweater? The revenue is still $25, but now look, the pink MC curve has shot up above the orange MR line. The cost of making that 10th sweater is now more than the money you'll get for it. You'd lose money on that specific sweater. So you stop right where the lines cross, at 9 sweaters. Same answer as before, but a much smarter way to get there.
So, making a profit is great, but what happens when the market turns on you? What happens when the price plummets and you start losing money? Well, this leads to one of the hardest decisions any business has to make, which we'll get into in our 4th section, the shutdown decision. So here's the problem. The market price for sweaters has crashed. No matter what you do, you're going to lose money today. Your first instinct might be to just lock the doors and call it a day. But is that always the right move? Is it better to stay open and lose some money, or shut down temporarily and still lose money on things like rent?
To answer this, we need a new tool. We need to split our costs into 2 types. You have fixed costs, like your factory rent, which you have to pay no matter what. Then you have variable costs, like wool, electricity, wages, that only exist if you're actually producing stuff. This purple curve is the average variable cost, or AVC. The absolute lowest point on this curve is your shutdown point. For our sweater company, that's at a price of $17. This is the critical line in the sand.
So the rule is actually pretty straightforward. If the market price is higher than your average variable cost, you stay open. Yeah, you might be making an overall loss, but every sale you make covers its own day-to-day costs and contributes at least something towards paying your rent. If you shut down, you'd have zero revenue to help pay that rent. But if the price drops below your average variable cost, you have to shut down. At that point, you're not even covering the cost of the wool for each sweater, so staying open just makes your losses even worse.
This graph shows that exact scenario, losing money but staying open. Let's say the price falls to, say, $17.01. That price line is way below the blue average total cost curve, so we're definitely losing money overall. But, and this is the whole point, it's still just above the purple average variable cost curve. That means every sweater we sell covers its variable costs and chips in a tiny bit towards our fixed costs. Shutting down would mean losing all our fixed costs, so by staying open, we are actually minimizing our loss.
All right, we figured out how a firm decides what to produce when things are good and what to do when things are bad. In this last section, we're going to put it all together to build one of the most important ideas in all of economics, the supply curve.
We're back to our trusty marginal cost curve. Now remember the golden rule, produce where price equals marginal cost. So we can actually use this MC curve like a kind of cheat sheet. If the market price is $25, we just find $25 on the side, go across to the MC curve and look down. The firm will supply 9 sweaters. If the price goes up to $31, we do the same thing. Find $31, go across to MC and drop down. Now they'll supply 10 sweaters.
And now for the big reveal. Look at the bottom graph. It just plots the points we just found. A price of $17 gets you a quantity of 7. A price of $25 gets you 9. A price of $31 gets you 10. And when you connect those dots, what have you just drawn?
You've drawn the supply curve. This is a really amazing insight. A firm's supply curve is its marginal cost curve, but only for the part that's above the shutdown point. They are the exact same thing.
So there we have it. We've built this incredibly elegant model of a market where firms are price takers. They perfectly produce where marginal cost equals price, and it all leads to a super efficient outcome for everyone. It's a beautiful machine, in theory. And that leads to one final question to leave you with. If this market is so efficient, with prices driven right down to the cost of production, why is it so incredibly hard to find a perfect example of it in the real world? What is it about our economy that always pushes firms to try and break these perfect rules? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.